Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant Dawn and stared at the holographic display before him. The message from the Galactic Council glowed in soft blue light, and every word felt like a knife cutting into his chest. For the 47th time in his career, humanity's request for expansion rights had been denied. He clenched his fists and tried to keep his face calm, but Commander Lisa Hayes saw right through him. She had served with him for 12 years and knew every expression he made. Lisa walked closer and put her hand on the command console. The bridge crew worked quietly around them, but everyone felt the tension in the air. This was not just another rejection. This was different. 300 years ago, humanity had signed the Treaty of Andara. Back then, humans were new to space travel and knew nothing about the dangers waiting among the stars. The Galactic Council had offered protection in exchange for limitations. Humanity could only settle 12 star systems. They could only build certain types of ships. They could only conduct approved research. At the time, it seemed like a fair deal. Earth was alone and vulnerable, and the galaxy was filled with ancient civilizations that had conquered thousands of worlds. But 300 years had passed, and humanity had grown. They had learned. They had become stronger. Yet the Council still treated them like children who needed supervision. Jake looked at Lisa and shook his head slowly. She understood without words. The Council had just granted the insectoid Zarketh permission to colonize another 100 star systems. The Zarketh now controlled over 3,000 systems, while humanity remained trapped in 12. The injustice burned like acid in Jake's stomach. He had visited Zarketh colonies and seen how they stripped planets bare, consuming every resource before moving to the next world. Yet, the Council praised them as responsible stewards of the galaxy. Meanwhile, humanity's carefully maintained colonies, with their green parks and clean cities, were deemed too aggressive and expansionist. On Earth, Admiral Ben Carter sat in his office at Fleet Command and read the same message. He was 63 years old and had spent his entire adult life serving in the Earth Defense Fleet. He had watched humanity struggle and strain against the invisible chains that bound them. The treaty restricted everything. Population growth was monitored. New technologies required Council approval. Military development was severely limited. Even scientific research needed permission from alien bureaucrats who barely understood human biology. Ben had climbed through the ranks, hoping to change things from within. But he now understood the truth. The system was designed to keep humanity weak. The Council did not want partners. They wanted subjects. Ben stood and walked to the window of his office. Below him, the sprawling city of Geneva stretched toward the horizon. Millions of people lived and worked there, unaware that their entire civilization was suffocating. The 12 human systems were becoming crowded. Population controls had been implemented decades ago to prevent overcrowding, and young couples now needed permits to have children. Meanwhile, species like the reptilian score bred without restriction and spread across the galaxy like weeds. The score were known for their brutality and had conquered dozens of peaceful species, but the Council never sanctioned them. Humanity, which had never started a war with another species, remained under constant scrutiny. The final message arrived on a cold Tuesday morning. Ben read it 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. The Council had ordered humanity to evacuate and surrender one of their 12 systems. The colony of New Seattle, home to 40 million people, would be handed over to the Score Empire as reparations for a trade dispute that humanity had not even been involved in. The Score had accused the crystalline Nexari of violating trade agreements, and somehow the Council decided that humanity should pay the price. Ben felt something break inside him. This was no longer about fairness or justice. This was about power, and the Council was making it clear that humanity had none. He opened a secure communication channel and began sending messages to every human fleet commander, every colony governor, and every military installation across human space. The encryption was unbreakable, using quantum keys that changed every microsecond. Within 6 hours, every human leader had received the same simple message. The age of submission was over. Humanity would bow to no one. Ben knew what this meant. He was declaring independence from the Galactic Council and all the treaties that bound humanity. This would be seen as rebellion. The Council would respond with force. Many humans would die. But Ben also knew that doing nothing would lead to humanity's slow extinction. Better to fight and risk everything than to fade away quietly. Captain Jake Morrison received Admiral Carter's message while the Valiant Dawn was patrolling the border of human space. He read it twice and then called his senior officers to the briefing room. Lisa Hayes arrived first, followed by Lieutenant Ryan Foster from Navigation and Lieutenant Nicole Grant from Tactical. Jake displayed the message on the central screen and watched their faces as they read. Ryan was young, only 26, and his eyes went wide with shock. Nicole was older and more experienced, and she simply nodded slowly as if she had been expecting this. Lisa smiled for the first time in weeks. They discussed what this meant. The Council would see this as an act of war. Human fleets would face the combined might of civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. The odds seemed impossible. But Jake also knew something the Council did not. For the past decade, humanity had been secretly upgrading their fleet in violation of treaty restrictions. Ships that looked like simple patrol cruisers on the outside contained weapon systems that rivaled anything the Council possessed. Research facilities hidden in asteroid belts had developed new technologies without Council oversight. Materials scientists had created armor that could withstand directed energy weapons. Engine designers had built drives that could outmaneuver anything in space. Humanity had been preparing for this moment, even if they did not know exactly when it would come. Jake looked at his officers and saw determination in their eyes. Ryan began plotting courses to strategic locations. Nicole brought up tactical displays, showing every Council military installation near human space. Lisa started coordinating with other fleet groups, sending encrypted messages to captains she had known for years. Everyone moved with purpose and confidence. The fear Jake had expected to see was absent. Instead, he saw relief. The waiting was over. The pretending was done. Humanity was finally going to stand up and fight for their right to exist as free people. Jake returned to the bridge and gave the order to prepare for combat operations. The crew responded instantly, and the Valiant Dawn's engines flared brighter as the ship accelerated toward its destiny. Behind them, across all 12 human systems, thousands of ships began to move. The galaxy was about to change forever. Admiral Ben Carter walked into the Galactic Council chamber exactly 24 hours after sending his message to all human forces. He wore his full military dress uniform with every medal he had earned over 40 years of service. The chamber was massive, designed to make individual beings feel small and insignificant. Holographic projectors displayed the faces of council members from across the galaxy. The avian Talshari representatives perched on high platforms, their golden feathers gleaming under the lights. The crystalline Nexari stood in perfect geometric formations, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns. The reptilian Score delegation watched with cold eyes, their forked tongues tasting the air. At the center sat Council Chairman Velthas, a being from the ancient Quar species, who stood 3 meters tall and had lived for over 600 years. Ben walked to the speaker's platform without hesitation. He carried no notes and no data devices. Everything he needed to say was burned into his memory. The chamber fell silent as he reached the platform. Velthas spoke first, his voice deep and resonant. He demanded to know why humanity had mobilized its military forces without council approval. Ben smiled slightly and activated the holographic display behind him. It showed all 12 human systems with their colonies and stations clearly marked. Then he spoke, and his voice carried to every corner of the chamber. For 300 years, humanity had honored every agreement made when they were weak and afraid. They had watched as species half their age colonized freely, while humans were confined to a handful of worlds. They had tolerated insults, restrictions, and now demands for their own territory. Today, humanity announced the immediate dissolution of the Treaty of Andara and all subsequent agreements that limited their sovereign rights. Humanity was claiming independence, and no council vote would change that decision. The chamber erupted in chaos. The Talshari representatives screeched and flapped their wings in outrage. The Nexari pulsed with angry red light, their crystals vibrating at frequencies that made the air hum. The score hissed and showed their fangs. Vel'Thas rose from his seat, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. He demanded that humanity reconsider immediately. The consequences of rebellion would be severe. Economic sanctions would cripple human industry. Military action would be authorized. Human colonies would be blockaded. Ben listened to all the threats and nodded calmly. Then, he spoke again. Humanity expected all of this. Humanity was prepared for all of this. And humanity would not back down. He turned and walked out of the chamber before the council could respond. Behind him, the shouting continued. But Ben did not look back. The talking was over. Now came action. On the Valiant Dawn, Captain Jake Morrison watched the live transmission of Admiral Carter's speech. The entire bridge crew stood silent as they listened to their admiral declare humanity's independence. When Ben walked out of the council chamber, the crew erupted in cheers. Jake let them celebrate for a moment before calling for order. They had work to do. Lieutenant Ryan Foster pulled up navigation charts showing the disputed territories between human space and council-controlled regions. Lieutenant Nicole Grant ran diagnostics on all weapon systems. Commander Lisa Hayes coordinated with the other fleet groups spread across human space. Messages flew back and forth in encrypted bursts. Captain Danny Price commanded the 2nd Fleet near the outer colonies. Captain Lauren Wells led the 5th Fleet at the border with Score territory. Dozens of other captains acknowledged their orders and prepared to move. The human fleet, which the Council believed to be small and weak, began to reveal its true strength. Jake gave the order to advance, and the Valiant Dawn's engines roared to life. Around them, 50 other ships accelerated in perfect formation. These were not the primitive vessels the Council remembered from 300 years ago. Human engineers had spent decades developing new technologies in secret. The ships moved with grace and speed that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. Their hulls were covered in adaptive armor that could redistribute impact energy across entire sections. Their weapons included not just energy beams and missiles, but also mass drivers that could accelerate projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. The Council had assumed humanity would respect the treaty limitations on military development. They had been very wrong. The fleet moved toward the system of New Seattle. The colony, the Council had ordered humanity to surrender. Jake knew the Council would send forces to enforce their decision. He planned to be there first. The journey took 6 days at maximum speed. During that time, messages from Earth kept coming. The Council had announced economic sanctions against humanity. All trade agreements were canceled. Human assets in Council space were frozen. Access to rare minerals and exotic materials was cut off. The Council expected humanity to collapse within months, unable to maintain their technology without imports. What the Council did not know was that humanity had prepared for exactly this scenario. Dr. Sophie Chen worked in a laboratory deep beneath the surface of Mars. She was 41 years old and had devoted her entire career to materials science. For 15 years, she had led a secret project to develop synthetic alternatives to every resource humanity imported from Council space. When the sanctions hit, Sophie activated production facilities hidden across the outer colonies. Factories that had been built in disguise, appearing to be simple mining operations or agricultural domes, suddenly began producing advanced materials. Quantum processors, antimatter containment units, energy storage cells, and 1,000 other components rolled off assembly lines. Human industry did not slow down when the sanctions hit. Instead, it accelerated. Sophie watched the production numbers climb and allowed herself a small smile. The Council had given humanity the perfect excuse to reveal capabilities they had been hiding for years. Ambassador Kate Sullivan sat in her office on Earth, and composed messages to governments across the galaxy. She had served as humanity's representative to the Council for 8 years, and knew which species were unhappy with Council rule. The insectoid Vrix had been denied expansion rights for decades despite their growing population. The aquatic Delphari had seen their ocean worlds claimed by the Talshari and turned into mining operations. The methane-breathing Cross had been forced to pay excessive taxes to maintain their few colonies. Kate reached out to all of them with a simple message. Humanity was breaking free from Council control. Any species that wanted true independence was welcome to join them. The responses came quickly. Some species were too afraid to act openly, but many others expressed interest. Within a week, Kate had opened secret diplomatic channels with representatives from 20 different civilizations. A coalition was forming, and the Council had no idea it was happening. The Zarketh were the first to respond militarily. Their hive queens saw humanity's rebellion as weakness and an opportunity to claim more territory. The Zarketh swarm sent 500 warships toward New Seattle. Their commanders expected humanity to retreat or surrender. Instead, they found Captain Jake Morrison and the Third Fleet waiting for them. The battle began at the edge of the system as Zarketh scouts detected human ships. The insects immediately swarmed forward, their vessels moving in the chaotic patterns that had overwhelmed countless enemies. But human ships did not panic. They moved with coordinated precision, each vessel covering its neighbors. When the Zarketh opened fire with plasma weapons, human shields absorbed the impacts and held firm. When the insects tried to surround human formations, they found themselves walking into carefully prepared kill zones. The battle that followed would change everything. The Battle of New Seattle lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant Dawn and watched as 500 Zarketh warships entered the system. The insects moved in their typical swarm patterns, thousands of smaller craft surrounding larger hive ships. Their tactics had worked for centuries against other species: overwhelm the enemy with numbers, strike from all directions, and never stop pressing forward. But humanity had studied Zarketh tactics extensively and knew their weaknesses. Lieutenant Ryan Foster coordinated fleet movements with calm precision, his fingers dancing across the navigation console. Lieutenant Nicole Grant monitored targeting solutions, her eyes tracking hundreds of enemy vessels simultaneously. Commander Lisa Hayes managed damage control teams across the entire fleet, ready to respond to any crisis. Jake gave the order to engage, and the human fleet opened fire. The first weapons to activate were not energy beams or missiles, but mass drivers, firing solid projectile rounds accelerated to 12% of light speed. The Zarketh shields were designed to deflect energy weapons and had proven effective against most species. They were completely useless against kinetic weapons moving at relativistic speeds. The first salvo punched through 30 Zarketh vessels, the impacts releasing energy equivalent to nuclear weapons. The insect formation wavered as ships exploded or tumbled out of control. The Zarketh commanders responded by ordering the swarm to scatter and attack from multiple vectors. This was exactly what Jake wanted them to do. Human ships moved with unexpected agility, their advanced engines allowing them to change direction faster than Zarketh sensors could track. The tactical AI systems aboard each human vessel processed battle data in microseconds, coordinating responses across the entire fleet without need for verbal commands. When the Zarketh tried to surround a human cruiser, 3 other ships were already moving to support it. When insects attempted to focus fire on damaged vessels, they found themselves being flanked by fresh human warships. Nicole's targeting solutions eliminated Zarketh command ships with surgical precision, disrupting the hive mind communication that coordinated their forces. Without central direction, the swarm began to fragment into smaller groups that attacked without coordination. The Zarketh plasma weapons did score hits on human ships. The Valiant Dawn took several direct impacts that scorched its hull and overloaded 2 shield generators. Lisa directed repair teams to the damaged sections while maintaining power to essential systems. The ship shuddered as another plasma bolt struck the port side. But the adaptive armor redistributed the impact energy and prevented a hull breach. Jake felt the deck vibrate beneath his feet and kept his eyes on the tactical display. The battle was going exactly as planned. Human casualties were minimal, while Zarketh losses climbed steadily. After 3 hours, the insect commanders realized they were losing and attempted to retreat. Jake ordered the fleet to let them go. Humanity had made its point. When the battle ended, 430 Zarketh ships were destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had lost 12 vessels with another 20, damaged but repairable. Jake sent recovery teams to search for survivors from the lost ships and retrieved 17 crew members from escape pods. The galaxy watched recordings of the battle and struggled to understand what they had seen. Humanity was supposed to be weak and dependent on Council protection. Instead, they had destroyed a Zarketh fleet with minimal losses. Analysts across Council space tried to explain how this was possible, but they lacked crucial information. They did not know about the secret development programs or the technology humanity had been hiding. They assumed human victory was luck or some kind of trick that could not be repeated. They were about to learn how wrong they were. General Eric Stone commanded human ground forces from a base on New Seattle. He was 52 years old and had fought in dozens of peacekeeping operations across human space. Now, he prepared for real war. The Score Empire had occupied 3 former human colony sites that had been abandoned decades ago due to Council pressure. These colonies had been built by human pioneers who were forced to leave when the Council decided the systems were too close to Score territory. Eric received orders to liberate those colonies and re-establish human presence. He loaded his forces onto assault transports and headed for the nearest occupied world, a planet called Haven that had once held 2 million human colonists. The Score garrison numbered 50,000 reptilian soldiers supported by orbital weapons platforms. They expected any attack to come from space and had positioned their defenses accordingly. Instead, human forces used stealth shuttles to insert special operations teams directly onto the planet's surface. These teams wore powered combat armor that made each soldier equal to 10 unarmored opponents. The armor enhanced strength, provided energy shields, and included smart weapon systems that could track and engage multiple targets. Eric watched from orbit as his teams moved through the Score garrison like wolves through sheep. The reptilians were tough and vicious, but they fought as individuals. Human soldiers operated as coordinated units, covering each other and using combined tactics that overwhelmed Score defenses. Within 18 hours, Haven was liberated. The Score survivors retreated to their ships and fled the system. Eric's forces suffered minimal casualties, mostly from Score booby traps and desperate last stands. The general immediately began organizing the return of human colonists who had been waiting decades for this moment. 2 more occupied worlds were liberated over the following week. The Score Empire, which had terrorized smaller species for centuries, found itself unable to stop human military forces. Their leaders sent urgent messages to the Council demanding intervention. The reptilians who had been so eager to claim human territory now begged for protection from human retaliation. Ambassador Kate Sullivan worked around the clock from her office on Earth, conducting negotiations with species interested in breaking free from Council control. The Battle of New Seattle had proven that the Council was not invincible. Kate used this momentum to formalize agreements with 27 different civilizations. They called themselves the Free Species Coalition, and their charter was simple. Every species had the right to self-determination. No civilization would be restricted based on arbitrary Council decisions. Members would defend each other against aggression. Trade would be free and fair. Scientific knowledge would be shared. Kate knew this coalition would be seen as a direct threat to Council authority. She also knew that many species were tired of being second-class citizens in a galaxy ruled by ancient empires. Captain Megan Torres commanded the diplomatic escort fleet that protected coalition representatives as they traveled between systems. Her ships ensured that no Council forces could threaten or intimidate species considering membership. Megan was 38 years old and had earned a reputation for both diplomatic skill and tactical brilliance. When Talshari warships tried to intercept a coalition delegation, Megan positioned her fleet between them and made it clear that any attack would be met with overwhelming force. The avian warriors, famous for their aggression, backed down rather than test human resolve. This happened several times over the following weeks. Council species began to realize that threatening coalition members meant fighting humanity, and fighting humanity was proving to be a very bad idea. The Council held emergency sessions to discuss the crisis. Their authority was crumbling as more species joined the coalition. Their military forces had suffered embarrassing defeats. Their economic sanctions had failed to hurt humanity. Chairman Velthas argued for restraint and negotiation, but he was overruled by hardliners who demanded a show of strength. The ancient Qular species had ruled the Council for thousands of years and could not accept being challenged by humans who had only been in space for a few centuries. War Master Drenkoth, commander of the Qualar Dreadnought fleet, received authorization to use whatever force necessary to restore Council authority. His orders were clear and brutal. Make an example of humanity that would terrify other species into submission. The target chosen was Earth itself, the human homeworld. Drenkoth assembled a fleet of 80 dreadnoughts and began the journey toward the Sol system. These were not ordinary warships, but massive vessels that could destroy entire planets. The Qualar believed this overwhelming display of power would force humanity to surrender. They believed wrong. Admiral Ben Carter received intelligence reports about the Qualar fleet's approach 3 weeks before they arrived at the Sol system. His network of spies and sensor stations tracked the 80 dreadnoughts as they moved through space. Each Qualar dreadnought was 5 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to level a continent. War Master Drenkoth commanded the fleet from his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and made no secret of his intentions. He broadcast messages throughout Council space, declaring that Earth would be reduced to ash as punishment for human rebellion. Other species would watch and learn what happened to those who defied the Council. Ben read these broadcasts and smiled coldly. The Qualar were about to learn a lesson themselves. The Sol system had been humanity's home for thousands of years. Every human alive felt deep connection to the planets and moons that orbited the yellow sun. Earth held 10 billion people. Mars hosted another 3 billion in underground cities and domed settlements. The asteroid belt contained hundreds of mining stations and research facilities. Jupiter's moons were home to gas harvesting operations and military bases. Saturn's rings hid construction yards where new ships were built. Ben had spent the past 20 years fortifying this system against exactly this kind of threat. The Council thought they knew the Sol system's defenses, but they had only seen what humanity wanted them to see. The Armstrong station floated in Earth's shadow, hidden from long-range sensors by the planet's magnetic field and carefully positioned debris. The station was massive, a cylinder 20 kilometers long and 5 kilometers in diameter. It had been built in secret over 15 years, using resources diverted from official construction projects. Dr. Sophie Chen had designed the station's primary weapon system, a graviton beam array that manipulated spacetime itself. The weapon had never been tested at full power because the energy release would be visible across half the galaxy. Ben stood in the station's command center and watched as Lieutenant Commander Claire Bennett ran final diagnostics on the weapon systems. Claire was 34 years old and had triple doctorates in physics, engineering, and weapons design. She reported that all systems were functioning within acceptable parameters and ready to fire on command. The first fleet assembled around Earth under Ben's direct command. 200 warships took up defensive positions in a sphere formation that covered all approach vectors. Admiral Jake Morrison brought the Third Fleet from New Seattle to defend Mars. Captain Danny Price positioned the Second Fleet near Jupiter. Captain Lauren Wells led the Fifth Fleet to guard the outer system approaches. Defense platforms orbited every major planet and moon, each one bristling with weapons and sensors. Fighter wings launched from bases across the system and took up patrol routes. The Sol system had been turned into a fortress, and 40,000 human military personnel stood ready to defend their home. The Qualar fleet arrived at the edge of the system exactly when intelligence predicted. War Master Drenkoth's dreadnoughts dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. their massive hulls gleaming with ancient metal alloys. The War Master immediately broadcast a demand for Earth's surrender. He gave humanity 1 hour to submit or face annihilation. Ben responded with a single word: no. Drenkoth seemed almost pleased by the defiance. He had lived for 800 years and commanded fleets that had conquered dozens of worlds. In his experience, species that refused to surrender died quickly. He ordered his fleet to advance on Earth at battle speed. The Qual dreadnoughts moved forward in a wedge formation, their shields powered to maximum and their weapons charging. When they crossed the outer defense perimeter, human platforms opened fire with everything they had: missiles, energy beams, kinetic rounds, and experimental weapons rained down on the Qualar fleet. The ancient shields held firm, absorbing impacts that would have destroyed lesser ships. Drenkoth laughed as human defenses battered uselessly against his vessels. This would be easier than expected. His fleet continued advancing, smashing through defense platforms and destroying any human ship that got too close. They were 3 light minutes from Earth when Claire Bennett fired the Armstrong Station's graviton beam. The weapon drew power from antimatter reactors buried deep in the station's core. Energy levels climbed to levels that made instruments scream warnings. Claire ignored the alerts and kept her hand steady on the firing control. When she pressed the button, space itself seemed to ripple. The graviton beam reached out across millions of kilometers and struck the leading Quar dreadnought. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The beam created a localized gravity well that pulled the dreadnought in multiple directions simultaneously. The ship's hull, which had survived countless battles over centuries, came apart at the molecular level. Metal, electronics, crew, and everything else inside the vessel was torn into component atoms in less than a second. A cloud of expanding gas was all that remained of a ship that had seemed invincible moments before. Drenkoth's confident expression vanished. He stared at the tactical display showing the complete destruction of one of his dreadnoughts. No weapon should be capable of that level of devastation. He ordered his fleet to identify the source of the attack and destroy it. Klar sensors swept the area around Earth, but detected nothing unusual. The Armstrong Station remained hidden in the planet's shadow, its stealth systems masking its presence. Claire fired again, and another dreadnought died. Then a third. The Quar fleet scattered, abandoning their formation in panic. Drenkoth screamed orders, trying to restore discipline, but his commanders were too shocked to respond properly. Meanwhile, human fleets that had been holding defensive positions suddenly went on the attack. Admiral Jake Morrison led the assault on the Qualar right flank. His ships moved with coordinated precision, targeting Qualar dreadnoughts that had been separated from the main group. Human weapons proved far more effective than expected. The mass drivers punched through Quar shields after repeated hits. The energy weapons overloaded Quar systems when focused on single points. The experimental plasma torpedoes that Dr. Chen's team had developed burned through armor that had been thought impenetrable. Jake watched as his fleet systematically dismantled ships that were each 10 times larger than his largest vessel. The Quar had size and raw power, but humanity had speed, coordination, and weapons designed specifically to counter Quar defenses. Captain Danny Price's second fleet hit the Quar left flank with equal success. Captain Lauren Wells brought the 5th Fleet in from above, catching Quar ships between multiple human forces. The battle became a slaughter. Qualar dreadnoughts that had survived hundreds of battles fell one after another. Crews that had believed themselves invincible found themselves outmatched by humans they had dismissed as primitive. Drenkoth tried to organize a retreat, but human forces had surrounded his fleet. The only escape route led directly past the Armstrong Station, and Claire Bennett made sure no ship survived that journey. The graviton beam fired again and again, each shot erasing a dreadnought from existence. The Eternal Dominion took concentrated fire from 3 human fleets simultaneously. Drenkoth stood on his bridge and watched his fleet die around him. 800 years of life and combat experience meant nothing against an enemy that fought with such precision and ferocity. His shields failed, his weapons went offline, and his hull began to crack under the assault. The last thing he saw before his flagship broke apart was Earth hanging in space, peaceful and blue, and completely intact. The humans had defended their home successfully, and the greatest military force the Council could assemble had been destroyed. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, all 80 Quellar dreadnoughts were gone, reduced to debris fields that would orbit the Sol system for centuries. Human losses numbered 15 ships destroyed and 43 damaged. Not a single shot had hit Earth or any inhabited world. The galaxy watched the recordings in stunned silence and finally understood the truth. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not primitive. Humanity was dangerous. 6 months after Admiral Ben Carter's Declaration of Independence, the galaxy looked completely different. The Galactic Council that had ruled for thousands of years existed only in name. Their authority had crumbled like sand in a storm. The Free Species Coalition controlled over a third of known space and continued to grow as more civilizations joined every week. Species that had spent centuries under Council domination now governed themselves freely. Trade flourished without Council taxes and restrictions. Scientific research advanced without bureaucratic oversight. The old order was dying, and something new was being born. Admiral Jake Morrison, promoted after the Battle of Earth, commanded the Coalition's first combined fleet from his flagship. The Valiant Dawn now flew alongside vessels from 20 different species, each contributing their unique capabilities to the combined force. His second-in-command was still Lisa Hayes, now holding the rank of commander and serving as chief of staff for all Coalition military operations. She coordinated fleet movements across hundreds of star systems, ensuring that Coalition forces could respond quickly to any threat. The bridge crew included officers from multiple species working together seamlessly. A Vrix engineer monitored the power systems with compound eyes that could see across multiple spectrums. A Delphari navigator plotted courses through regions of space that only aquatic species understood properly. A human tactical officer worked alongside a cross-weapons specialist. The crew represented everything the Coalition stood for: unity through cooperation rather than domination. The former Council species faced difficult choices. The Zarketh hive structure had collapsed after the death of their queen mother during the Second Battle of New Seattle. The insect civilization fragmented into dozens of smaller hive groups, some hostile and some seeking peace. Jake negotiated with several Zarketh factions that wanted to join the Coalition. They agreed to give up their conquered territories and focus on developing their core systems peacefully. Other factions refused and continued raiding independent worlds. Coalition forces hunted down these pirates and eliminated them without mercy. The Zarketh learned that the Coalition would accept those who sought peace, but would destroy those who chose violence. The Skor Empire suffered the most dramatic transformation. General Eric Stone's ground forces liberated 40 Skor-occupied worlds and turned them over to their original inhabitants. The reptilian military, once considered the most fearsome in the galaxy, retreated to their home systems after suffering defeat after defeat. The Skor government initially planned to rebuild their forces and seek revenge. Then Ambassador Kate Sullivan visited their capital world with an offer. The Skor could join the Coalition as equal members, maintain their sovereignty, and trade freely with other species. Or they could remain isolated, watching as former subjects prospered, while the Skor stagnated. The Skor leaders were proud, but not stupid. They accepted Coalition membership with the understanding that any future aggression would result in immediate expulsion and military consequences. The reptilians who had once terrorized smaller species now had to live by the same rules as everyone else. The Talshari proved more adaptable than expected. The avian warriors had always respected strength, and humanity had demonstrated overwhelming strength. When Captain Megan Torres negotiated a non-aggression pact with the Talshari High Council, the bird people agreed immediately. They saw which way the wind was blowing, and chose to align with the rising power, rather than cling to the dying council. The Talshari even began sending military advisors to help train coalition forces. Their aerial combat tactics, combined with human technology, created devastating new fighting styles. Former enemies became wary allies, united by practical concerns rather than friendship. Only the Qular remained completely defiant. The ancient species refused to accept that their time as galactic rulers was over. War Master Dren Koth had died in the Battle of Earth, but other Qual commanders rose to take his place. They rallied the remaining Council loyalists for one final attempt to restore the old order. The Nexari crystalline beings joined them, along with a dozen smaller species that feared coalition expansion more than they resented Council domination. Together they assembled a massive fleet, drawing on reserves from hundreds of worlds. 3,000 warships gathered at the system of Andara, the same place where humanity had signed away their freedom 3 centuries ago. The symbolism was deliberate. The Council loyalists would crush the rebellion where it had begun. Admiral Ben Carter, now serving as the coalition's supreme commander, recognized the symbolic importance as well. He assembled an equally large force to meet the threat. 3,000 coalition ships from 50 different species converged on Andara. Human vessels formed the core of the fleet, but they were supported by Vrix carriers, Delphari cruisers, Cross destroyers, and dozens of other ship types. Ben stood in the command center of a mobile battle station that served as coalition headquarters. Around him, officers from multiple species worked at their stations. The diversity was remarkable, but everyone shared the same goal: defending the right of all species to determine their own futures without interference from ancient empires. The Battle of Andara began at dawn on a day that would be remembered throughout galactic history. 6,000 ships met in combat, the largest military engagement in recorded history. Millions of crew members fought for causes they believed in. Trillions of beings across the galaxy watched the battle transmissions and waited to see which vision of the future would prevail. For 18 hours, the two fleets hammered at each other with every weapon technology had created. Energy beams crisscrossed space. Missiles streaked between formations. Kinetic weapons punched through hulls. Explosions lit up the darkness as ships died on both sides. Human tactical doctrine proved superior to Council military traditions. Coalition forces fought with flexibility and coordination that rigid Council hierarchies could not match. When one coalition ship was damaged, others immediately covered its retreat. When Council formations tried to concentrate fire, coalition vessels scattered and reformed elsewhere. Dr. Sophie Chen's material science breakthroughs kept coalition ships fighting even when damaged. General Eric Stone's Marines boarded and captured dozens of Council capital ships, turning enemy vessels against their former allies. Ambassador Kate Sullivan's diplomatic preparation paid off as several Council species surrendered rather than fight to the death. They had joined the Council out of fear, not loyalty, and when offered fair terms, they abandoned the fight. The turning point came when War Master Threnkall, Dren Koth's successor, tried to ram his flagship into Admiral Morrison's position. Jake saw the attack coming and maneuvered the Valiant Dawn aside, while 3 supporting cruisers opened fire on the Eternal Dominion. The Qualar flagship, already damaged from hours of combat, could not withstand the concentrated assault. Its shields failed, its hull cracked, and the great ship broke apart in a massive explosion. Threnkall died as his predecessor had, refusing to accept that Qular dominance was over. With their leader dead, the remaining Council loyalists lost heart. Ships began surrendering or retreating. The battle ended not with a final explosion but with thousands of ships going silent and powering down their weapons. Ambassador Kate Sullivan spent the next month negotiating terms with the defeated Council species. She drafted the Charter of Free Species, a document that guaranteed rights for all civilizations. Every species could govern themselves without outside interference. Military aggression for conquest was forbidden. Trade would be free and fair. Scientific knowledge would be shared openly. Disputes would be resolved through negotiation rather than force. The charter was not perfect, and Kate knew that enforcement would require constant vigilance. But it was better than the old system, where ancient empires dictated terms to everyone else. Representatives from over 100 species signed the charter, creating a new galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination. Admiral Ben Carter stood on the bridge of the Valiant Dawn as it orbited Andara. Below them, the planet where humanity had once surrendered their freedom now hosted celebrations as the charter was signed. Ben watched the coalition fleet assembled around them, ships from dozens of worlds flying in formation. He thought about the cost of achieving this moment. Thousands of humans had died in the fighting. Billions had been spent on weapons and ships. Alliances had been forged in fire and blood. But humanity had proven something the galaxy had forgotten. Freedom was not given by the powerful to the weak. Freedom was taken by those brave enough to fight for it. Captain Jake Morrison joined Ben at the observation window. Together they watched the celebration below. Jake spoke quietly, saying that this was just the beginning. The charter created framework for peace, but maintaining that peace would require constant effort. New challenges would arise, species would test the boundaries, conflicts would need resolution. Ben agreed, but said humanity had never expected the work to be easy. They had only demanded the chance to do that work as free people. The galaxy had changed overnight when humanity declared independence. Now came the harder task of building something better than what had been destroyed. Ben looked at Jake and smiled. Humanity had struck back against oppression and won. Now they would help build a galaxy where no species ever had to strike back, because all species were already free.